The sun, relentless and cruel, bore down on the throngs of people below, its heat oppressive, a testament to the peak of summer. Family Fun Land was the destination of choice, its allure irresistible, drawing visitors from near and far. My skin, a fiery shade of pink from days in the sun, clung to the fabric of my drenched uniform. I could almost feel the weight of my shirt, drenched in sweat, its hue slowly changing, a reminder of the long hours under the unyielding sun. One would think that staying still would be easy, but even inactivity had its toll. In this sweltering maze, the one respite came in the form of the Ferris wheel's shadow. Its ever-turning structure cast slivers of shade on the parched ground below. There I'd wait, hoping the breeze from the nearby ocean would bring fleeting moments of relief. Family Fun Land, nestled against the windswept coast of Western Australia, was a modest theme park. Its features were simple: carnival rides that spun or swung, games that promised oversized stuffed animals, and kiosks peddling the usual fare. Its charm, I suspect, was less about the attractions and more about its exclusive presence in the area. Having joined the ranks of its employees in spring, I had quickly carved out a niche for myself, overseeing security at the park's entrance. My role, deceptively mundane, was to ensure that every entrant had paid their dues. Most of the time, this simply meant maintaining a vigilant stance, allowing the hours to slowly bleed away, waiting for the moment I could rest my aching back. Every shift seemed to stretch endlessly, leaving me to question whether I'd last till my birthday at summer's end. My counterpart was Smokey, a security stalwart who had seen more summers than anyone I knew. Age had thinned his once lustrous hair, now slicked back and graying. The origins of his nickname were lost to time, and I never really cared to unearth its roots. His demeanor, cold and distant, kept others at bay. I often wondered if the park's management had positioned us together intentionally, the grizzled veteran and the fresh recruit, a balance of experience and youthful energy. That particular summer unfolded much like any other. Smokey, always engrossed in his crossword puzzles, would often take breaks to scrutinize the faces in the crowd, perhaps searching for someone or something. I, on the other hand, had become a master observer. From beneath the Ferris wheel, I would study the park's visitors, concocting elaborate life stories, imagining their pasts and what had led them to our humble park. One day, amid the hum of conversations and the distant clamor of rides, an uneasy feeling descended upon us. Smokey, seemingly sensing it too, dropped his crossword, the pen rolling away. The source of this unease wasn't from the queue at the entrance, but from within the park itself. Distinct sounds of distress echoed, causing a ripple of panic among the visitors. My eyes darted, trying to locate the epicenter of the commotion. Amid the ebb and flow of visitors, my eyes landed on a scene that sent shivers down my spine. A balding man, perhaps in his mid-40s, forcefully steered two children ahead of him, a boy and a girl. His fingers dug into their shoulders as they resisted, their little feet dragging, trying to slow their march towards the exit. One might assume a simple parental reprimand, or maybe it was just time to go. However, something felt amiss. The scene was subtle enough to blend into the backdrop of everyday occurrences, evading the notice of most, but not Smokey and me. That bald man exuded an unease, a disquiet that I couldn't quite articulate. I nudged Smokey, trying to draw his attention to what I had observed. Instead, I found his gaze was fixated elsewhere. Following his line of sight, I realized he was peering intently at the bleachers of the outdoor auditorium, where vibrant acrobatic shows and circus acts entertained audiences at intervals throughout the day. Given the time, just after noon, the auditorium should have been devoid of any soul, waiting in quiet anticipation for the next act scheduled for 1:30. But a lone figure disrupted that stillness. A man, inconspicuously dressed in a long trench coat and black cap, stood aloof. Curiously, he had positioned himself in a place not easily accessed without attracting attention. Next to him rested a long case. My heart raced as he glanced momentarily in our direction, a piercing gaze that suggested he knew we were onto him. He then shifted his attention back to the case, extracting from it an unmistakable object, a rifle. The sight was chilling. The rifle, even from a distance, was undeniably distinct, topped with a precision scope. Within moments, the man had the weapon hoisted and was scanning the crowd. The very scene unfolded so rapidly, it was almost surreal. Smokey, always the quicker of the two of us, was already plowing through the sea of visitors towards the auditorium. I fumbled with my radio, voice quivering. Code red. Hostile in the auditorium. It was the most dire alert, one I had hoped never to utter in my career. The administration office would immediately dial emergency services upon hearing this. For a split second, I hesitated. Armed merely with a baton, I questioned my next move, but duty compelled me. Charging headlong into the throng, I sounded alarms, urging people to clear the path. My urgency, my panic, sent waves of concern through the crowd. People recoiled, their expressions a mix of confusion and dread. As I approached the auditorium entrance, panting heavily, I was met with fellow security staff, their faces a mask of confusion. They looked to me for answers. Gasping for air, I motioned to the spot where I had seen the armed man. But to our collective shock, the bleachers were barren. The ominous man, his rifle, and the case had vanished. Logic dictated there was no feasible exit he could have used to evade us. The very ground beneath us seemed to shift as we tried to fathom the inexplicable disappearance. It felt like a walk of shame, recounting the perplexing events of the previous day to my fellow security personnel. Each retelling was met with varying degrees of skepticism and disbelief. The weight of having to justify my actions pressed heavily on me, especially to the higher-ups in management. I found myself fervently wishing for Smokey's backing. Yet, bizarrely, Smokey was nowhere to be found. Instead of rushing to the auditorium as I had, he had apparently vanished, deciding, for reasons unknown to me, that heading home was the best course of action. Before I had the chance to process or even rest, my next shift loomed ahead. Overwhelmed by the sting of embarrassment, I wrestled with my own memories. Did I really witness what I thought I had, or was it merely a trick of the light, an illusion spun by my mind? Smokey's reaction, his sudden departure, added another layer of complexity. Why would he leave unless he too had seen something? These nagging questions clouded my mind. As I prepared for work, the potential confrontation with Smokey played out in countless ways in my imagination. Arriving at the amusement park on yet another blistering summer day, I found him exactly where I expected. Lounging against the railing by the Ferris wheel, seemingly engrossed in what appeared to be one of his many crossword puzzles. My patience worn thin, I knocked the puzzle from his hands. "Where were you?" I demanded. "We saw that man, and you just disappeared." He looked up at me, feigning ignorance. His casual tone irked me even more. I didn't run, Ted. But his nonchalance did little to calm my frustration, especially given the fact that when the situation had turned dire, he was conspicuously absent. I might have overstepped with my next comment, suggesting he had the least at stake. Yet his face remained impassive. Instead, he countered with a question about how I felt being left alone to face the ridicule of our colleagues when the sniper was nowhere to be found. I admitted, begrudgingly, my embarrassment. Smokey's demeanor then shifted from casual indifference to one of gravitas. He handed me what I'd mistaken for a crossword. It was actually a newspaper with a chilling headline: "Local father abducts and murders children." The accompanying image was eerily familiar. The very bald man I'd seen with the children. My heart raced as I connected the dots. Before I could process this revelation, Smokey shared another, equally unsettling piece of information. He spoke of a haunting specter, a ghostly sniper that had made sporadic appearances throughout the park for the 3.5 decades he'd been employed there, and perhaps even longer. He didn't expect me to believe this uncanny tale, and admitted he had given up trying to convince others. This apparition wasn't a threat, but rather a forewarning of an impending tragedy. Smokey's advice was clear. Should I encounter this phantom sniper again, rather than focusing on the apparition, I should scan my surroundings for the real threat. While preventing a disaster might be a tall order, recognizing the signs and alerting the right individuals could potentially stave off a calamity. Upon my direct query, Smokey clarified his sudden absence during the auditorium incident. Rather than heading towards the commotion, his instincts had driven him to pursue the unsettling bald man and the two children. Yet the dense crowd at the park swallowed them, rendering his efforts futile. As he circled the vicinity for hours, it became evident that they had vanished without a trace. It was a haunting confession. Through all the years he'd served in this park, he had never managed to deter any forewarned incident. Yet his motivation to remain was an admirable one. The hope that even once, he might prevent an impending catastrophe. It made me realize that every time the spectral sniper made an appearance, Smokey knew deep down that some unspeakable event was unfolding, out of his reach. The subsequent days at work resumed a semblance of normalcy. The topic of the sniper wasn't broached again, but his words marinated in the back of my mind, casting a heavy shadow on my thoughts. The skepticism I initially felt regarding the sniper's existence began to waver. The vividness of my memory was undeniable, and Smokey's corroborative account only solidified its legitimacy. Consequently, my sense of duty and vigilance were amplified tenfold. Every face in the crowd was scrutinized for the slightest hint of malice or abnormality, seeking out any unusual behavior that could be a precursor to disaster. However, the vast expanse of the park, with its labyrinthine alleys and obscured corners, limited the efficacy of my watch. While I may have been patrolling the main corridors, a multitude of areas remained unseen. I convinced myself that with preparation and vigilance, I'd be better equipped to handle the sniper's next appearance. But reality proved otherwise. One day, it was Smokey's sharp eyes, not mine, that caught the spectral sniper first. As I followed his alarmed gaze, I spotted the sniper, not amidst a crowd or atop the bleachers, but solitarily positioned on a small pier branching from the main boardwalk. This pier, though offering a beautiful panoramic view of the ocean, was rarely frequented by the park's visitors. And there he stood, the sniper, seemingly drinking in the vista, the wind tussling the ends of his coat. The ominous case lay by his side. Strikingly, his gaze was fixed upon us, as if he recognized our recognition of him. Our silent exchange was interrupted by a mutual instinct to approach him. My younger legs gave me an advantage, allowing me to weave swiftly through the gathering. Yet, as fate would have it, my line of sight was momentarily obscured by a passing visitor. That split-second obstruction was all the sniper needed to vanish, leaving behind just the view of the ocean waves lapping against the wooden planks of the pier. An exhaustive search underneath revealed nothing. Finally, as Smokey caught up, panting from the exertion, he gazed upwards, as though seeking answers from the heavens. Was it an inquiry to a higher power, a plea for understanding, or perhaps a silent curse for another missed opportunity? Whatever it was, the weight of the moment hung heavily between us, punctuated by the constant murmur of the oblivious crowd around. Smokey's sheer anguish was palpable as he fell to his knees, not so much from physical exhaustion, but from an overwhelming sense of despair and hopelessness. I instinctively reached out, attempting to offer support, but he declined my hand. The familiar twinkle in his eyes was now replaced with a deep sadness, an almost tangible grief. As he whispered, "We'll never catch him," his voice carried an unfamiliar quiver. This was not the seasoned, confident Smokey I knew. The vulnerability in his voice was heart-wrenching. Distracted by a subtle splash, my gaze drifted to the waters below. There, a sight that still haunts my dreams. A young boy, lifeless, his body gently bobbing against the pier's supports. The sunburnt, blistered skin on his neck suggested that he'd been exposed to the elements for a prolonged time. Later, as I watched the news, the boy's cheerful images, in stark contrast to my last memory of him, flashed on the screen. The broadcast detailed his disappearance from his parents' dock, located a bit up the coast the day before. The juxtaposition of life and death was gut-wrenching. After the tragic incident, both Smokey and I were granted extended leaves from our duties. Though the idea was to offer time for healing and recuperation, my days were plagued by an unsettling blend of boredom and paranoia. The recurring images of the sniper and the deceased boy were unrelenting. Upon my return, I was met with more unsettling news. Smokey had resigned. The pier incident had been the breaking point, pushing him into a retirement that perhaps should have come earlier. His absence left a void, one filled by a young, inexperienced teenager, to whom I decided not to confide about the sniper. The responsibility of safeguarding family funland now weighed heavily on my shoulders. Despite understanding the limitations of my capabilities, I felt a renewed commitment to the park's safety. Days turned to weeks, and as normalcy settled, the haunting image of the sniper started to fade. But this sense of security was short-lived. One fateful day, as my gaze scanned the seemingly mundane crew of park attendees, something unusual on the cityscape beyond piqued my interest. The buildings facing the park, usually displaying the predictable hustle and bustle of urban life, hid a subtle anomaly. Amidst the old downtown structures, with their quaint storefronts and upper-floor apartments, a small silhouette stood out. While rooftop terraces were common, their occupancy during hot days was not. Yet there it was, a lone figure, its form eerily reminiscent of the sniper, standing confidently on the edge, overlooking the park. A lesser observant individual might have dismissed this as a mere anomaly. But to me, it was unmistakably him. And in that brief moment, I could sense his piercing gaze locking onto mine. The same chilling familiarity from our first encounter. The implications of his appearance loomed large. What calamity was about to befall family funland this time? And was I truly prepared to confront it? With an unwavering determination, I quickly made the decision to approach the ominous figure on the rooftop. My sense of duty, reinforced by the weight of the baton at my side, propelled me forward. Navigating through the throngs of excited parkgoers, I focused on reaching the exit as fast as possible. Once out in the parking lot, the figure atop the building remained in sight, becoming both my beacon and target. Upon reaching the road, I took advantage of a brief gap in traffic to cross and locate the building's fire escape. As I ascended the metal structure, every creak and groan felt deafening, alerting the sniper of my approach. Yet, when I finally reached the terrace, I was taken aback to find him still standing at the edge, seemingly lost in observation. This was the closest I had ever been to him. Surprisingly, he bore no distinctive features or menacing aura. Instead, he appeared as any other aging man, his skin weathered by the passage of time, reminiscent of Smokey. Carefully, I tried to move closer without detection. However, a small pebble skidded under my foot, surely loud enough to betray my position. But the sniper remained motionless until I was merely steps away. It was then that he slowly turned to face me. Instead of reaching for a weapon or attempting to flee, he pulled out a slip of paper from within his trench coat, presenting it to me with a strange sense of urgency. The words scrawled in a familiar black ink read, "Sniper will never leave. The only way to make him go was for us to go. Embrace your chance to make a difference." It was the same handwriting I had seen countless times as Smokey completed crossword puzzles under the Ferris wheel. Raising my gaze from the haunting note, I found the terrace empty, with no trace of the sniper. Yet, as I took a moment to survey the bustling park below, an even more alarming sight caught my attention. A curious void had appeared in the park's main corridor, right in the midst of its busiest section. And at the center stood a solitary figure, unmistakably recognized by his stance. Smokey. Draped in a trench coat strikingly similar to the sniper's, he slowly revealed the coat's inner lining, showcasing a series of ominous cylindrical devices. The horrifying realization hit me. Smokey was armed and poised to cause unimaginable harm. The scene felt surreal as screams echoed from the crowd, which fled in all directions. Even from my distant vantage point, I could see a thin wire connecting the devices to a handheld detonator. In what felt like an eternity, but must have been mere seconds, our eyes locked. It was as if Smokey was silently acknowledging my presence, silently sharing a final moment of understanding. Then, the once vibrant and lively main corridor was consumed in a catastrophic explosion, a horrifying blend of gray and orange smoke obliterating the view. The aftermath was a tragic loss of innocent lives, including Smokey's, forever branding family funland with a dark shadow of terror. The sniper's warning had been realized, and its cost was unimaginable.